quiet waitress noticed the symptoms everyone ignored and ended up saving her boss's life. Emily had always been a quiet employee at the Home Spice restaurant, observing everything in silence while serving customers with a polite smile. She had worked there for 3 months, and no one imagined her ability to notice details would completely change her boss's fate. It was during the busy Thursday lunch rush that she noticed something odd about Richard Miller, the owner of the establishment. He had dropped 2 plates in the kitchen in less than an hour, something that never happened to someone as skilled as him. "Richard, are you okay?" Emily asked, balancing a stack of clean plates while watching him subtly lean against the counter. "Of course I am, Emily, just a little tired," he replied, wiping his sweaty forehead. But Emily wasn't convinced. Over the past few days, she had noticed small signs the other employees seemed to ignore. How Richard blinked more than usual, how his hands trembled slightly when he thought no one was looking, and especially how his speech had become slightly slurred in recent weeks. Home Spice was located in the heart of Williamsburg, New York City, and Richard had built his reputation serving the best home-style food in the area. At 45, he was known for his tireless energy and perfectionism in the kitchen. That's why these subtle changes stood out so much to Emily. During her afternoon break, while arranging tables in the empty dining room, Emily reflected on what she'd observed. Her father had gone through something similar years ago before being diagnosed with uncontrolled diabetes. The symptoms were alike, but something told her Richard's problem might be different. "Em, can you help me in the kitchen?" Richard called from the back. When she entered, she found Richard holding the side of his head, his face twisted in pain he was trying to hide. "Mr. Richard, do you have a headache again?" "Again?" He stopped and looked at her in surprise. "How did you know I've had headaches before?" Emily realized she'd revealed more than she intended. Over the past 2 weeks, she'd noticed Richard taking small breaks, massaging his temples, always when he thought no one was paying attention. "I noticed you sometimes stop and do this," she said, mimicking the temple massage. Richard stared at her for a long moment. It wasn't the first time he'd noticed this new employee's sharp eye. Emily was only 28, but she had a maturity that impressed him. Unlike the others, she was never late, never complained, and always seemed to notice things everyone else missed. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. The following Friday, the problem worsened. Richard was preparing his famous shrimp gumbo when his right hand began trembling uncontrollably. The pot nearly slipped from his grip, and he had to steady himself against the stove to keep his balance. "Boss, let me finish that," said Michael, the assistant cook, unaware of the seriousness of the situation. "No need, Michael. I'm just—" Richard tried to continue, but his voice came out strange, as if his tongue wasn't fully cooperating. Emily, who was organizing clean plates on a nearby shelf, immediately stopped what she was doing. This wasn't just fatigue or stress. She'd seen similar symptoms before, and a chill of worry ran down her spine. During her childhood, Emily had spent a lot of time in the hospital with her grandmother Margaret, who suffered 3 strokes over 10 years. She remembered perfectly the signs the doctors always mentioned: difficulty speaking, weakness on one side of the body, sudden and intense headaches. "Mr. Richard," she approached carefully, "have you seen a doctor recently?" "A doctor? What for?" he replied, trying to regain control of the situation. "I'm fine, Emily. I just need to rest a bit." "Excuse me, but you're not fine," she said, with a firmness that surprised even herself. "I think you should see a doctor today." Richard stopped what he was doing completely and turned to face her. There was something in Emily's voice that unsettled him. It wasn't just ordinary employee concern. There was knowledge there, as if she understood something he was trying to ignore. "Why are you saying this?" he asked, his voice still slightly slurred. Emily took a deep breath. She knew she was stepping into delicate territory, but something inside her screamed that she couldn't stay silent. "Mr. Richard, over the last 3 weeks I've noticed you've had frequent headaches, your hands shake sometimes, and now your voice sounds different. My grandmother had 3 strokes, and I recognize these signs." The silence that fell over the kitchen was deafening. Michael stopped chopping onions and looked at the two of them, not understanding the tension in the air. Richard, meanwhile, felt as if someone had thrown cold water on his face. "A stroke," he murmured, the word coming out with difficulty. "It might not be that," Emily said quickly, realizing the shock she'd caused. "But you need to get checked. Please." Richard sat in a nearby chair, suddenly realizing he really hadn't been feeling well for weeks. He'd attributed it all to the stress of running the restaurant, overdue bills and supplier issues. But now that Emily had put her observations into words, he couldn't ignore the symptoms anymore. "My wife has also been saying I've been acting strange," he admitted, almost as if talking to himself. "She said sometimes I stop mid-sentence and forget what I was saying." Emily nodded gravely. She'd noticed that too, but hadn't mentioned it to avoid alarming him further. "Mr. Richard, I know it might sound silly, but do you know your high blood pressure numbers?" she asked. "I don't. I've never checked," he replied, running a hand through his graying hair. "My grandmother always said high blood pressure is a silent killer. You don't feel anything until it's too late." Those words echoed in Richard's mind like an alarm bell. His mother had died from complications related to hypertension when he was just 20. Back then, he was too young to fully understand what had happened, but he remembered the doctors mentioning she'd never monitored her blood pressure. "Do you really think I should see a doctor today?" he asked, and for the first time Emily saw fear in his eyes. "I think you can't wait until Monday," she replied honestly. Richard looked around the kitchen at the bustle starting to build in the restaurant, at Michael still waiting for instructions about the shrimp gumbo. His first thought was of all the responsibilities he had, all the customers who'd be arriving soon. "But today's Friday, it's going to be busy." "Mr. Richard," Emily interrupted him, her voice carrying a seriousness that made everyone in the kitchen pay attention. "What good is the business if you're not here to see it?" The words hit Richard like a punch. For the first time in weeks, he truly stopped to consider the possibility that something serious might be happening with his health. Michael, who had been silently observing the conversation until then, finally spoke up. "Boss, if you want to go to the doctor, Emily and I can hold down the fort here. It's not the first time we've done this." Richard looked at his two employees and felt a wave of gratitude. Emily, in particular, had shown genuine concern that touched him deeply. She had barely known him for 3 months, yet she'd noticed details even his wife had overlooked. "All right," he finally said. "I'll call Dr. Williams and see if he can see me today." Emily let out a relieved sigh but kept a serious expression. Something still bothered her, an intuition she couldn't quite name. "Mr. Richard, do you have a family member's number who can come pick you up? I don't think you should drive." Richard froze mid-reach for his phone. Emily's suggestion hit him like a bucket of cold water. If she was suggesting he shouldn't drive, it meant she truly believed the situation was serious. "Why shouldn't I drive?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. "If you're really having blood pressure issues or other neurological problems, driving could be dangerous for you and others." The maturity and knowledge Emily displayed left Richard puzzled. How did a 28-year-old waitress know so much about medical symptoms? "Emily, can I ask you a personal question?" he said, putting his phone away. "How do you know so much about these things?" Emily hesitated for a moment, nervously fiddling with the apron tied around her waist. "My grandmother had 3 strokes between when I was 12 and 18. I always went with her to appointments, hospital stays, and recovery. I ended up learning a lot about warning signs." "And your grandmother?" Richard started to ask, but stopped when he saw the look on Emily's face. "She recovered from all 3, lived until she was 84, but only because we always paid attention to the symptoms and got her to the doctor quickly." Richard felt a mix of relief and worry. Emily's experience gave him hope, but also confirmed the situation might be more serious than he wanted to admit. "I'll call my wife," he decided. "She can take me to the hospital." As Richard made the call, Emily kept organizing the kitchen, but her mind was racing. There was something else she'd noticed over the past few days, but she wasn't sure if she should mention it. Richard had started repeating instructions he'd already given, and sometimes he seemed confused about orders he'd just received. "Karen will be here in 20 minutes, Richard announced, hanging up. "Emily, I want to thank you. If it weren't for you... No need to thank me, Mr. Richard. I just hope it's nothing serious. But deep down, Emily knew Richard was facing something significant. Her intuition, sharpened by years of caring for her grandmother, screamed that every minute was precious. When Karen arrived at the restaurant, Emily was struck by how worried Richard's wife looked. She was a woman in her 40s, brown hair pulled into a ponytail, dressed in simple but neat clothes. "Richard, you look so pale," were the first words Karen said upon seeing him. "Emily here noticed some things I've been ignoring," Richard explained. "She thinks I should get some tests done." Karen turned to Emily with an expression of gratitude and relief. "Thank you for looking out for him," she said, briefly squeezing the employee's hand. "I've been telling him for weeks he wasn't himself, but you know how men are." "You've noticed changes too?" asked Emily. "I did notice. He's been forgetting simple things. Sometimes he stops mid-conversation as if he's lost his train of thought, and the headaches have been constant." Richard listened to the conversation between his wife and their employee with a mix of surprise and apprehension. Two people who knew him well had noticed changes in his behavior, and he had chosen to ignore all the signs. "Let's go to the hospital," said Karen, taking her husband's arm. "Dr. Williams said he'll wait for us in the emergency room." Before leaving, Richard turned to Emily. "Take care of the restaurant for me, and Emily, thank you for paying attention." After Richard and Karen left, the restaurant grew quieter. Michael took over the main kitchen, and Emily managed the service, but her mind was with her boss at the hospital. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. For the next 3 hours, Emily kept the restaurant running smoothly, but she was constantly distracted. Every time the phone rang, she hoped it was Karen with news. Several regular customers asked where Richard was, and she simply explained that he'd stepped out to handle a personal matter. Around 7 in the evening, as business was winding down, the phone finally rang. Emily answered with her heart racing. "Emily?" It was Karen's voice, tired but composed. "How's Mr. Richard?" Emily asked immediately. "He's been admitted. The doctors confirmed he's had what they call small silent strokes. Several, in fact, over the past few weeks." Emily felt the floor shift beneath her. Even suspecting something like this, hearing the confirmation was a shock. "But he'll be okay?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The doctors say yes, especially because we brought him in time. If we'd waited a few more days or if he'd had a major stroke..." Karen didn't need to finish the sentence. Both understood the implications. "The doctor said you saved my husband's life," Karen continued, her voice thick with emotion. "He said the symptoms you noticed were crucial for early diagnosis." Emily felt tears burn her eyes. All her life, she'd felt invisible. Just another person trying to get by working simple jobs. She never imagined her ability to observe could make such a difference in someone's life. "How long does he need to stay in the hospital?" she asked. "At least a week. They'll run more tests, adjust his medication and monitor him to make sure there are no other issues." After hanging up, Emily sat in one of the empty restaurant chairs and let herself process what had happened. In just a few hours, her life had completely changed. She wasn't just a quiet waitress anymore, she was someone who had saved a life. Michael approached, drying his hands on a dish towel. "Heard about Richard. You were amazing, Em. How did you know it was something serious?" "Family experience," she replied simply. "My grandmother always said we need to look out for each other, because sometimes we're the only ones who can tell when something's wrong." In the days that followed while Richard was in the hospital, Emily took on responsibilities she'd never imagined having. Karen came to the restaurant every morning to handle administrative matters, but she trusted Emily completely with managing the day-to-day operations. "Emily, I need to talk to you," Karen said on Tuesday morning, sitting at one of the tables in the still-closed restaurant. "Is something wrong?" Emily asked, pouring coffee for them both. "On the contrary, Richard and I have been talking and we want to make you an offer." Emily felt a chill in her stomach. Work proposals weren't always good news. "When Richard returns, he'll need to slow down. The doctor was clear about that. He can't work 12-hour days 7 days a week anymore." Karen paused to take a sip of coffee before continuing. We want to offer you the manager position at the restaurant. You know all the processes, the customers trust you, and most importantly, you genuinely care about this place. Emily stayed silent for several seconds, trying to process what she was hearing. Manager? She repeated, as if the word were in a foreign language. With a manager's salary, profit sharing, and the authority to make important decisions, Richard will still be the owner, but you'd be responsible for daily operations. But I'm just a waitress, said Emily, her insecurity showing. You're a waitress who noticed symptoms doctors might have missed. You're a waitress who kept this restaurant running perfectly for 5 days without supervision. And you're a waitress who cares so much about people that you risked your job to save your boss's life. Karen's words touched Emily deeply. Her whole life she'd felt underestimated, seen as just another service worker. She'd never imagined her natural abilities could be recognized and valued like this. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course. But Emily, don't think you don't deserve this. Richard told me something I'll never forget. She paid attention to me when I wasn't even paying attention to myself. That's more than just professional competence. That's human care. That night, alone in her small apartment in Williamsburg, Emily reflected on everything that had happened. Just a week earlier, she'd been an invisible employee, doing her job quietly without being noticed. Now she was being offered an opportunity that would completely change her life. She thought of her grandmother Margaret, who always told her, "Em, God gave you the gift of noticing things. One day, you'll understand why." Maybe that day had come. On Wednesday, when Richard was discharged from the hospital, Emily was waiting at the restaurant with a chocolate cake she'd made the night before. It was her grandmother's recipe, and she wanted to celebrate her boss's recovery. Richard walked into the restaurant slowly, with Karen holding his arm. He was thinner and paler, but his eyes shone with a gratitude Emily had never seen before. "Emily," he said, approaching her, "I don't know how to thank you for what you did." "You don't have to thank me, I'm just glad you're okay." "No, I do. The doctor explained what was happening to me. I'd been having small strokes for at least 3 weeks. If you hadn't insisted I go to the hospital on Friday, I probably would have had a major stroke over the weekend, and then—" Richard couldn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood what he meant. "What matters is that you're okay now and know how to take care of yourself," said Emily, cutting a slice of cake. "Karen told me about the offer we made. Have you decided?" Emily took a deep breath. Over the past 2 days, she'd weighed the pros and cons, talked to her family, and even visited her grandmother Margaret's grave to ask for advice. "I accept," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves, "but on one condition." Richard and Karen exchanged curious glances. "What condition?" asked Richard. "That you promise to tell me if you're not feeling well. No hiding symptoms or pretending everything's fine when it's not." Richard laughed for the first time since the medical episode. "I promise, but you have to promise me something too." "What?" "That you'll keep paying attention to the people around you. That ability of yours to notice when something's wrong. It's a rare gift, Emily. Don't waste it." In the following months, the restaurant Home Spice flourished under Emily's management. She made small changes that improved efficiency without losing the homey charm customers loved. More importantly, she created an environment where staff felt cared for and valued. Michael was promoted to head chef, and Emily hired 2 new waitresses, always reminding everyone of the importance of watching out for one another. Richard, strictly following medical advice, reduced his workload and spent more time with his family. His blood pressure stabilized, and he had no more neurological episodes. 6 months after the incident, on a quiet Tuesday evening, Richard was sitting at a restaurant table doing the books when he noticed something familiar. One of the new waitresses, Jennifer, was discreetly observing an elderly customer eating alone at a corner table. "Emily," Richard called softly, "do you see Jennifer?" Emily followed Richard's gaze and smiled. Jennifer was doing exactly what she had done months earlier, paying attention, noticing things others might overlook. "Jennifer," Emily said gently, "did you notice something about Mr. Frank?" Jennifer approached, looking relieved to have someone to share her concern with. He always comes here on Tuesdays and orders the same dish, but today he asked for the same thing 3 times, like he didn't remember he'd already ordered. And he's much shakier than usual." Emily and Richard exchanged a knowing look. "Do you want to talk to him?" Emily suggested. "Sometimes people just need someone to notice they're not okay." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us as we're just starting out. Now continuing, Jennifer approached Mr. Frank's table with the same care Emily had shown months earlier with Richard. "Mr. Frank, how are you feeling today?" she asked kindly. The elderly man looked up, seeming a little confused. I'm fine, dear. Why do you ask?" "It's just that you seem a bit tired. Would you like me to call someone from your family?" Frank hesitated for a moment, and Emily could see he was struggling to keep his composure. "My daughter lives far away and I don't want to bother her." "Mr. Frank," Jennifer said, sitting in the chair beside him, "bothering someone is when we call for no reason. Calling because we're worried is care." Jennifer's words echoed the ones Emily had used with Richard. There was something in the restaurant's atmosphere that encouraged this kind of mutual care. Half an hour later, Frank's daughter arrived at the restaurant, visibly worried. She explained to Emily that her father had been showing signs of memory issues, but refused to see a doctor. "He's so proud," she said. "He won't accept help from anyone." "Can I suggest something?" Emily said. "Sometimes it's easier to accept care from people outside the family. Mr. Frank comes here every week. We can keep an eye on him, and if we notice anything concerning, we'll call you." Frank's daughter accepted the offer with tears in her eyes. "You'd really do that? For a customer?" Richard, who had been watching the whole situation, stepped forward. "Ma'am, a few months ago, one of our employees saved my life just by paying attention to the small signs I was giving. Since then, this restaurant has become a place where people look out for one another. This philosophy of care spread far beyond the walls of Home Spice. The regular customers began forming an informal network of mutual support. Mrs. Evelyn, a 78-year-old widow who ate there 3 times a week, started giving rides to other seniors who had trouble with transportation. Mr. Jack, retired and lonely, began sharing his table with other customers who ate alone. Emily watched these changes with deep satisfaction. She had discovered that her ability to notice people's needs could create ripples of care that spread much further than she'd ever imagined. A year after the incident with Richard, the restaurant was chosen by the city as a model establishment for promoting social integration among seniors. The article in the local newspaper highlighted how a simple act of attentiveness had transformed an ordinary restaurant into a hub of community care. "Emily, did you see the article in the paper?" asked Karen, arriving at the restaurant with the newspaper in hand. "Yes, I did. I still can't believe we've come this far." Richard, who was doing much better but still strictly followed his new care routine, joined the conversation. "You know what I find most amazing about all this?" he said. "It all started with you paying attention to what everyone else was ignoring, and now we have a restaurant full of people looking out for each other." Emily smiled, remembering the phrase her grandmother Margaret always repeated, "When you care for someone, you never know how far that care will go." But the story was far from over. A few weeks after the newspaper article, Emily received an unexpected call. "Hello, this is Dr. Samantha Johnson from General Hospital. May I speak with Emily Parker?" "That's me," Emily replied, feeling a twinge of nervousness. "Emily, I read the article about you in the paper, and I'd like to make a proposal. We're developing a training program for employees of commercial establishments to help them recognize early signs of health issues in elderly customers. Would you consider being our consultant?" Emily nearly dropped the phone. "Consultant? But doctor, I don't have any medical training." "Emily, you have something far more valuable than academic training. You have human sensitivity and practical experience. What you did for your boss is exactly what we want to teach others to do." After talking with Richard and Karen, Emily accepted the offer to become a consultant for the program. Once a week, she visited other restaurants, bakeries, pharmacies, and businesses to train employees on how to spot warning signs in elderly customers. The program turned out to be an extraordinary success. Within 6 months, over 50 establishments in the area had been trained, and there were already reports of lives saved, thanks to employees who had learned to pay attention, just as Emily did naturally. During one of these training visits, Emily met Jason, a 35-year-old pharmacist who had recently lost his father after failing to notice signs of heart problems in time. "Emily, if I'd known what you're teaching us, maybe my dad would still be here," he said after the training. "Jason, what matters is that now you can help others. Your father would be proud knowing his loss will help save other lives." Jason became one of the program's most dedicated collaborators, and a few months later he and Emily started dating. They discovered they shared not only a passion for caring for others, but also similar experiences of loss and resilience. 2 years after the incident that changed everything, Richard organized a party at the restaurant to celebrate the anniversary of the community care program. Over 100 people attended: regular customers, employees from other establishments trained by Emily, doctors from the hospital, and family members of those who had been helped by the program. During his speech, Richard shared the full story of how a quiet waitress had changed not only his life, but an entire community. "Emily didn't just save me," he said, emotional. "She taught us that paying attention to one another isn't just kindness, it's responsibility." When it was Emily's turn to speak, she was visibly moved. "When I was a child, my grandmother Margaret used to tell me that God had given me special eyes to see when people needed help. For a long time, I didn't understand what she meant. I thought it was just something she said to make me feel special." She paused, looking around at everyone gathered there. "Today, I understand that it's not the eyes that are special. It's the heart that's willing to pay attention, and all of you have that heart." The party went on late into the evening, but the most touching moment came when Jennifer, the waitress Emily had hired, approached her. "Em, I wanted to tell you something. Remember Mr. Frank, the one I noticed was having memory problems?" "Of course I remember. Yesterday his daughter called me. They found out he was in the early stages of Alzheimer's, but because of the early diagnosis, the doctors were able to significantly slow the progression. He still comes here for lunch every week and he's doing much better." Emily hugged Jennifer with tears in her eyes. The circle of care kept expanding. 3 years later, the community care program had spread to other cities in New York State. Emily had become a nationally recognized speaker, talking about the importance of human attention in preventing health problems. But she never stopped working at Home Spice. Every morning, she arrived early to prepare the restaurant, greet the staff, and make sure the spirit of mutual care remained strong. One Monday morning, as she set up the tables for lunch, Emily noticed something that made her smile. Amanda, a new employee hired just 2 weeks earlier, was discreetly watching a young customer who seemed anxious and restless. "Amanda, did you notice something?" Emily asked gently. "It's that young man at table 3, Amanda said. "His hands are shaking badly. He's sweating even with the AC on, and he's already asked for 3 glasses of water in 10 minutes. Emily observed the customer for a moment. He did seem to be going through some kind of anxiety attack. "Do you want to talk to him?" she suggested. Amanda hesitated. "I don't know. What if he thinks I'm being nosy?" "Amanda, the worst that can happen is he says he's fine. But if he really needs help, you could make a difference." Amanda carefully approached the table. "Excuse me, do you need anything? Maybe a glass of sugar water?" The young man looked up and Emily could see he was clearly distressed. I think I'm having a panic attack," he said with difficulty. "It's never happened before. I don't know what to do." Amanda sat in the chair beside him. "Breathe slowly with me, okay? Inhale for 4, hold, and exhale for 4. Half an hour later, the young man was much better. He explained he'd been under a lot of stress at work and had woken up that morning feeling extremely anxious. "Thank you for noticing I wasn't okay," he told Amanda. "If you hadn't helped me, I think I would have panicked completely." Later, when the restaurant was quieter, Richard approached Emily. "Did you see what happened with Amanda today?" he asked. "I did. She's learning fast." "Emily, sometimes I think about what would have happened if you hadn't paid attention to me that day. And not just me, all the people who were helped because of what you started." Emily looked around the restaurant. seeing attentive staff, customers looking out for one another, people of different ages sharing conversations and laughter. Richard, you know what I've realized? When we truly pay attention to people, we don't just save one life, we save pieces of many lives. Richard nodded thoughtfully. Your grandmother would be proud. I think she knew this would happen, Emily said, smiling. She always said I had a special gift. Maybe the gift wasn't seeing problems, but seeing possibilities for care. That night, as she closed the restaurant, Emily found a note left by a customer on the table. It simply read, "Thank you for creating a place where people care about each other. The world needs more places like this." She tucked the note into the drawer where she kept all the thank you letters she'd received over the years. There were dozens of them, from family members of people who'd been helped, from employees who'd learned to pay attention, from customers who found not just food at the restaurant, but human kindness. 5 years after that Friday that changed everything, Emily sat in the same kitchen where she'd first noticed Richard's symptoms. Now she was a partner in the restaurant, married to Jason, and together they'd expanded the community care program to over 10 cities. Home Spice had become more than a restaurant. It was a symbol of how attention and human care could transform lives and entire communities. Richard, fully recovered and diligently following his medical care, walked into the kitchen carrying a stack of forms. We've got more training requests. 3 new cities want to implement our program." "How many people have we trained so far?" she asked. "Over 1,000 employees from businesses. And according to the hospital report, we've already recorded 127 cases of people who were helped early by staff trained through the program." Emily smiled, but her expression turned thoughtful. "Richard, sometimes I wonder, are we doing everything we can?" "What do you mean?" "I ask myself if we shouldn't expand this to schools, universities, companies. Imagine if we could train teachers to notice when a student isn't doing well, or managers to recognize when an employee is struggling." Richard stopped what he was doing and looked at her. "Emily, do you realize what you're suggesting? You're talking about changing how society as a whole cares for one another. Maybe that's exactly what the world needs," she said. "My grandmother always said small acts of care could change the world." Maybe she was right. 6 months after that conversation, Emily stood on stage in the city's largest auditorium, speaking to an audience of over 1,000 people, educators, healthcare professionals, business leaders, and community organizers. Her speech began just as it always did, by telling the story of how a quiet waitress noticed symptoms everyone else ignored and ended up not only saving her boss's life, but sparking a revolution of care that spread far beyond anyone's expectations. "What I've learned," she told the silent audience, "is that we all have the ability to pay attention to one another. We don't need to be doctors or psychologists. We just need to remember that we're all connected human beings, and that our attention can be the first step towards saving a life." After the speech, dozens of people approached Emily with their own stories. Teachers who had noticed depression in students, neighbors who had spotted signs of domestic violence, co-workers who had identified mental health issues in time to help. "Do you see what's happening?" said Jason, who had attended the talk. "What you started at the restaurant is becoming a movement." Emily looked around, watching all those people sharing stories of care and mutual attention. "I didn't start this," she said. "It was always inside people. I just reminded them that paying attention to one another isn't optional. It's necessary." 2 years later, the National Community Care Program had been officially recognized by the federal government as a public health initiative. Emily had been invited to oversee its nationwide implementation. But even with all the national recognition, she never abandoned Home Spice. Every Saturday morning she was still there, serving coffee to regulars, watching new employees learn to pay attention, making sure the original spirit of the place never faded. One such morning, as she arranged the tables, she found Richard reading a newspaper at the counter. "What are you reading?" she asked. "An article about us," he said, showing her the paper. "From local diner to national movement. The story of the waitress who changed the United States." Emily laughed. "They always exaggerate with those headlines." "Exaggerate? Emily, do you realize that since we started our program, early detection of health issues in seniors has increased by 40% in the cities where it's been implemented. You literally changed national health statistics. It wasn't just me, Richard. It was a whole network of people who learned to care for one another. But you were the first. You paid attention to me when I wasn't even paying attention to myself. At that moment, Amanda approached them carrying a tray of coffees. "Excuse me, Em. The lady at table 5 says she recognizes you from TV. Would you like to speak with her?" "Of course," said Emily, following Amanda to the table. The woman was in her 70s with neatly styled grey hair and kind but determined eyes. "You're Emily Parker, aren't you?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "My name is Helen Rodriguez. I was at your talk last month about community care in businesses. I'm so glad you came. What did you think?" "I found it inspiring. So much so that I implemented the program at my company. I'm the HR director at an accounting firm with 200 employees." Helen paused to take a sip of coffee before continuing. "We've already had 3 cases where employees were helped by co-workers who learned to pay attention. One was showing signs of severe depression, another had heart problems, and one employee was experiencing domestic violence but was afraid to ask for help." Emily felt that familiar mix of gratitude and responsibility that always came when she heard stories like this. "That's wonderful, Ms. Rodriguez. How's it working in practice?" "Better than I imagined. Not only are we identifying problems earlier, but the whole work environment has improved. People are more connected, more willing to help each other." "That's exactly what we hoped for," said Emily. "When people learn to pay attention to one another with the intent to care, it changes the whole dynamic of relationships." Helen smiled. "Emily, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "How do you handle the responsibility of knowing that so many lives have been changed because of something you started?" The question took Emily by surprise. It was something she often thought about, but rarely did anyone ask her directly. "Ms. Helen, I've learned that responsibility isn't about what I did. It's about what I keep doing. Every day, I wake up knowing I have the chance to pay attention to someone who might need help. And isn't it heavy, carrying that awareness that you can make a difference in so many people's lives?" "It would be heavy if I were doing it alone," Emily replied. "But what I've discovered is that when you teach others how to care, you don't carry the weight alone. You share it with an entire network of people who also care." Helen nodded, visibly moved by the answer. "Do you know the story you've created is more than inspiring? It's necessary. We live in a time when people are more connected technologically, but more disconnected humanly." "That's true," Emily agreed. "But what gives me hope is seeing that when people are reminded how to care, they want to care. The instinct is there. Sometimes it just needs to be awakened." After Helen said goodbye, Emily returned to the kitchen, reflecting on the conversation. It was true that her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined, but what struck her most was how every person touched by the program created their own circles of care. Jason arrived at the restaurant in the late afternoon, as he did every day after work at the pharmacy. "How was your day?" he asked, kissing Emily on the forehead. "Interesting. A businesswoman who implemented our program at her company came to talk to me. Made me think about a few things." "What kind of things?" "About the future of the program, about how far this can go." Jason poured himself a glass of water and sat on one of the kitchen stools. "Em, remember when we first met and you told me your grandmother always said you had a special gift?" "I remember. I think your grandmother was right, but not in the way you both thought." "What do you mean?" "The gift wasn't noticing when someone was in trouble. The gift was getting other people to care enough to pay attention too." Emily stopped organizing the utensils and looked at her husband. "Explain that better." Any observant person could have noticed Richard's symptoms. But you didn't just notice. You cared enough to risk your job to warn him. And then, when everything worked out, you weren't satisfied with just helping one person. You wanted to teach others to do the same." Jason paused, gathering his thoughts. "What's special about you isn't some superpower of observation. It's the ability to inspire care in people. That's what's rare." Jason's words echoed in Emily's mind in the days that followed. She began rethinking her entire journey since that Friday when she noticed Richard's symptoms. Maybe Jason was right. Maybe her real talent wasn't spotting problems, but awakening in people the desire to care for one another. A week after that conversation, Emily received a call that would once again change the course of her life. "Emily, this is Dr. Catherine Brown from the World Health Organization." "Good morning, Doctor," Emily replied, surprised. "Emily, we've been following the work you've developed in the United States, and we'd like to propose an international partnership. We're interested in implementing your community care model in other countries." Emily felt her heart race. Other countries? Yes, starting with Canada, Ireland, and Australia. If the results are positive, we'd expand to other countries in South Asia and eventually to other continents. After hanging up the phone, Emily sat quietly for several minutes, trying to process what she had just heard. Richard, who had overheard part of the conversation, approached her. "Emily, do you realize what this means?" he said, his eyes shining with pride. "You're taking your work to the whole world." "Richard, when all this started, I was just a waitress who noticed her boss wasn't doing well. How did we get here?" "We got here because you never stopped caring," he replied, "and because you taught thousands of others to care too." 6 months later, Emily was in Toronto, training the first international group of retail employees. The program had been adapted to fit Canadian cultural specifics, but the essence remained the same, teaching ordinary people to pay attention to one another with the intention of caring. Jason had moved with her, finding work at a Canadian pharmacy chain. Together they traveled to the countries participating in the program, implementing trainings and tracking results. Homespice continued operating under Richard's management, with Amanda, who had been promoted to manager. Every month, Emily received reports on how the restaurant still served as a model and training center for new program participants. On a winter evening in Melbourne, Australia, Emily was in her hotel room preparing a presentation for the next day when she received a video call from Amanda. "Em, how's it going over there?" Amanda said, smiling on the laptop screen. "I'm good, Amanda. Miss you all. How are things at the restaurant?" "Everything's great, but I wanted to share some news. Remember Jennifer, the one you trained a few years ago?" "Of course I remember. She opened her own restaurant downtown and implemented our program from day one. She already has 3 trained employees and 2 cases of customers who were helped." Emily smiled, feeling that familiar maternal pride she always had when she saw the program spreading through people's own initiative. "That's wonderful, Amanda. The circle keeps growing. Em, there's one more thing. Richard wants to talk to you." Richard appeared on the screen, looking older, but with eyes bright with health. "Em, my dear, how are things over there?" "Really good, Richard. Tomorrow we're doing the first training here in Melbourne. I'm excited." "Emily, I wanted to tell you something. Today marks exactly 7 years since that Friday when you noticed I wasn't doing well." 7 years? Wow, how time flies. And you know what I was thinking today? If you hadn't paid attention to me that day, I wouldn't be here to see everything we've built. Not just my life was saved. Thousands of lives have been touched because of what you started. Emily felt tears burning her eyes. "Richard, you know it wasn't just me. It was a chain of people who chose to care. But you were the first link in that chain, Em. And that's something that will never change." After ending the call, Emily sat by the hotel window, gazing at the lights of Melbourne spreading across the night. She thought of her grandmother Margaret, who had passed 5 years earlier, but not before seeing the start of the national program. "Grandma," she thought, "you were right about the special gift. It was even bigger than we imagined." The next day, during the training in Melbourne, Emily told the story of how it all began once again. But this time, something different happened. In the middle of the audience, a woman raised her hand. "Emily, I wanted to share something. 2 years ago, I worked as a receptionist at a medical clinic in the United States and attended one of your trainings. The following week, I noticed an elderly patient showing signs of confusion that no one else had picked up on. I alerted the doctor, and we discovered the gentleman had a serious medication issue. Because of the early intervention, he made a full recovery." The woman paused, clearly emotional. "But what I wanted to share is that the man was my grandfather. I didn't know it at the time. I only found out months later when my mother told me the story. I saved my own grandfather because of what I learned from you." The audience fell completely silent. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice trembling. Sarah Thompson. My grandfather is Jack Thompson." "And is he doing well?" "He's great. At 87, he still plays chess with me every week." Emily took a moment to compose herself. Stories like this reminded her that the program had created connections far beyond what she could have imagined. "Sarah, thank you for sharing that with us," she finally said. "Your story is the perfect proof that when we care for one another, we never know who we're truly saving." After the training, Sarah approached Emily. "Can I give you a hug?" she asked. "Of course," Emily replied, and the two embraced for a long moment. "Emily, I wanted to ask you something," Sarah said. "How do you handle knowing your actions have changed so many lives? Doesn't it make you dizzy sometimes?" It was the second time in a short while someone had asked her that. Emily realized it was something that resonated with many people. "Sarah, you know what I've learned? That the responsibility to care isn't a burden. It's a privilege. When you save a life, you don't carry the weight of that life. You carry the joy of having made a difference. But when you think about how many people have been helped because of something you started, I think it wasn't me who saved all those people. It was thousands of people choosing to save one another. I just reminded them they had that ability." 3 years later, the International Community Care Program was active in 15 countries. Emily had become a global reference in community-based preventive care, but she never lost the simplicity that had defined her since her waitressing days. At an international conference in Geneva, a journalist asked her what she considered the program's greatest impact. "Emily, statistics show the program has contributed to saving over 10,000 lives across 5 continents. What do you see as its biggest achievement?" "The greatest impact isn't the lives saved," she replied, surprising the audience. "The greatest impact is that millions of people remembered caring for one another is natural, that paying attention to others isn't extra work. It's human responsibility." "But surely you must feel proud of the numbers." "I'm proud of every person who chose to pay attention to someone else. The number doesn't matter. What matters is that each of them discovered they had the power to change someone's life." After the conference, Emily received a message that moved her deeply. It was from Richard, sent from the restaurant Home Spice. Today a customer told me he was saved by an employee trained by the program 3 years ago in Austin. Said he came here specially to see where it all began. He's at table 12, the same one you used to sit at to observe customers. Thought you'd want to know. With love, Richard." Emily showed the message to Jason, who was beside her at the airport, waiting for their flight back to the United States. "Jason, sometimes I feel like we're just at the beginning of something much bigger." "How so?" "Imagine if we could create a global culture where paying attention to one another was as natural as breathing, where every person felt responsible for the well-being of those around them." Jason smiled. Do you realize you just described a world where no one would be invisible anymore? Where everyone would be seen and cared for?" "That's exactly what I mean. My grandmother always said small gestures could change the world." Maybe she meant it literally. 10 years after that Friday that changed everything, Emily was back at Home Spice, no longer as an employee, but as a special guest for the celebration of a decade of the community care program. The restaurant was filled with people who had been touched by the program over the years. Trained staff, customers who had been helped, family members of those saved, healthcare professionals, researchers, journalists. Richard, now 55 and still rigorously taking care of his health, climbed onto a chair to make a toast. "Friends, 10 years ago, one of our employees noticed symptoms I was ignoring and saved my life. Today, the program born from that awareness is active in 23 countries and has helped save over 15,000 lives." Applause echoed through the restaurant. But what I want to celebrate today isn't just the statistics. I want to celebrate the fact that Emily reminded us of something we'd forgotten, that caring for one another isn't optional, it's essential. When it was Emily's turn to speak, she was visibly emotional. 10 years ago, I was just a quiet waitress who paid attention to her boss. Today, I'm here surrounded by hundreds of people who've chosen to pay attention to one another. She paused, looking around the packed restaurant. What I've learned over these 10 years is that we all have two superpowers: the ability to notice when someone isn't okay, and the courage to do something about it. All of you here are proof that those superpowers exist. An older woman at the back of the restaurant raised her hand. "Emily, may I share my story?" she said. "Of course, please." "My name is Irene. I'm 72. 5 years ago, I was going through severe depression after becoming a widow. One day, the cashier at the supermarket where I always shopped noticed I'd stopped buying fresh food and was only buying processed items. She asked if I was okay, and I broke down crying right there." Irene paused to compose herself. "That young woman had taken part in a training based on your program. She not only noticed something was wrong with me, but offered to take me to a doctor. Today, I'm here, healthy and happy, because a supermarket cashier cared about me." "Irene, thank you for sharing your story with us," said Emily. "And where is that cashier now?" "She's right over there," Irene replied, pointing to a young woman near the kitchen. "That's Lucy." Lucy waved shyly, and the entire restaurant applauded. "Lucy, could you come here?" Emily called. The young woman approached, clearly flustered by all the attention. "Lucy, could you tell us what it was like to realize Mrs. Irene needed help?" "It was natural," she said simply. She said, "After the training, I started paying more attention to regular customers. When I noticed Mrs. Irene's habits had changed drastically, I knew I had to do something." "And you weren't afraid of being intrusive?" "I was. But I remembered something you said in the training, that it's better to err on the side of too much care than too little attention." Emily smiled. "Lucy, you saved a life. How did that change you?" "It made me realize my job isn't just scanning items at the register. It's about caring for the people who pass through my life, even if just for a few minutes." The story of Lucy and Irene was followed by dozens of others. The restaurant turned into a great circle of sharing, where people told how they had been saved, or how they had saved someone simply by paying attention. Michael, who was now the head chef at Home Spice, shared how he had noticed signs of domestic violence in a delivery worker and helped her find support. Amanda, the manager, recounted how she identified signs of problematic alcohol use in a supplier and helped him seek treatment. "Do you realize what happened?" said Emily, after hearing all the stories. "Each of you has become an agent of care. You've multiplied infinitely that first bit of attention I gave to Richard." Jason, who was filming the celebration, approached Emily. "Em, can I ask everyone a question?" "Of course." He turned to the group. "How many of you, before learning about Emily's program, thought you didn't have the ability to save lives?" Nearly every hand went up. "And how many of you discovered you could make a difference in someone's life just by paying attention?" All the hands stayed raised. "That," said Jason, "is the real miracle of what you've created. It's not just lives saved, it's people discovering their own power to care." As the evening went on, people began forming small groups, sharing stories, exchanging experiences, and planning ways to expand care even further in their communities. Emily found herself sitting in the same kitchen chair where it had all begun, watching the movement of people caring for one another. From that spot, she could see the restaurant filled with conversations, laughter, hugs, and most of all, genuine human connections. Richard approached her with 2 cups of coffee. $1 for your thoughts," he said, offering her a cup. "I was thinking about my grandmother," Emily replied. "She always said I had special eyes. Today I realized those special eyes weren't just mine. They were lying dormant in every person who chose to pay attention." "And now, what's next?" Emily looked around at all the people who had become agents of care. "Now, Richard, the story isn't about me anymore. It's about each of these people who will keep paying attention, caring, saving lives. The program has become a culture, and cultures sustain themselves." "Are you saying your work is done?" "I'm saying my work has changed. Before, it was about teaching people to pay attention. Now it's making sure this culture of care never fades." At that moment, a girl about 8 years old approached them. She was Irene's granddaughter, who had come with her grandmother to the celebration. "Aunt Emily," the girl said, Grandma Irene told me you taught the lady at the supermarket to notice when someone isn't okay. Can you teach me too? Emily knelt to meet the girl's height. What's your name, sweetheart? Sophie. Sophie, do you want to learn how to care for people? Yes. Grandma said it's really important. Then I'll teach you the most important secret, Emily said softly, as if sharing something special. You just have to really look at people. Not a quick glance, but a careful look. And when you notice someone isn't okay, you ask, "Can I help?" It's that simple. That's all, Sophie asked. That's all. But it's the most important thing you can do for someone. Show them you care. Richard watched the exchange between Emily and Sophie with a smile. You know, Em, I think the next generation of the program was just born. Exactly, Emily replied. And this generation will grow up knowing that caring for one another is natural. They won't have to learn it as adults, it'll be instinctive. As the celebration came to an end, people began to say their goodbyes. But something special was happening. Instead of simply saying goodbye, they were exchanging contacts, making plans to meet, and creating networks of mutual support. Amanda approached Emily with a list in her hands. Em, look at this. 15 people volunteered to regularly visit seniors who live alone. 8 offered to accompany others to medical appointments. 12 want to form a support group for family caregivers. Amanda, do you realize what's happening? Emily said, moved. They're not just applying what they learned, they're creating new ways to care. It's like the program became a seed that grew into a giant tree, Amanda replied. And now that tree is producing its own seeds, added Richard, who had overheard the conversation. When everyone had left and the restaurant was empty, Emily, Richard, and Jason sat around a table, reflecting on the evening. 10 years, Richard said. If someone had told me back then that an employee noticing my symptoms would lead to all this, I wouldn't have believed it. Richard, can I confess something? Emily said. That day when I insisted you go to the doctor, I was terrified I was overreacting, that I was seeing a problem where there wasn't one. And if you hadn't insisted, then none of this would have happened. You might have had a severe stroke. I'd still just be an invisible waitress, and thousands of people would never have discovered they could make a difference in someone's life. Jason took Emily's hand. Em, do you realize your greatest courage wasn't noticing Richard's symptoms? It was choosing to care enough to do something about it. And teaching others to care too, Richard added. Emily looked around the quiet restaurant, imagining all the conversations, laughter, and moments of care that space had witnessed over the years. You know what's most amazing about all this? She said. Every person who learned to pay attention became capable of starting their own chain of care. It's endless. How so? Jason asked. Lucy saved Irene. Irene is now teaching her granddaughter to pay attention to people. Sophie will grow up caring for others and will teach other kids to do the same. Every life saved multiplies into more lives cared for. Richard nodded thoughtfully. It's like that story about pebbles thrown into a lake. One pebble creates ripples that spread to the shore. Exactly. And the most beautiful part is that now it's not just me throwing the pebbles. It's thousands of people in dozens of countries creating ripples of care every day. In the early hours of the morning, as she walked through the quiet streets of Williamsburg to get home, Emily thought about her journey. 10 years earlier, she had been an invisible woman, serving customers who barely noticed her presence. Now thousands of people around the world knew her name and had been touched by her work. But what amazed her most wasn't the recognition. It was knowing she had helped awaken in so many people something that had always been there, the natural ability to care for one another. When she got home, she found a letter that had arrived that day. It was from a nurse in South Africa, where the program had recently been implemented. Dear Emily, my name is Sarah, and I work at a hospital in Johannesburg. I attended your program's training 6 months ago. Yesterday I noticed an elderly patient showing signs of depression unrelated to his medical condition. I spoke with him and learned he had recently lost his wife and had no one to talk to about it. I connected him with our psychological support service. Today he told me I saved his life. I wanted you to know that your lessons reached all the way here, on the other side of the world. With gratitude, Sarah. Emily read the letter 3 times, each time feeling more moved. Sarah, someone she had never met in person, had saved a life using principles Emily had developed from her experience with her grandmother Margaret. It was the ultimate proof that human care knows no geographical or cultural boundaries. It was universal. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story and where you're watching from. Do you believe small gestures of kindness can truly change lives, as it did for Emily? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this one.